So I want you to pay real close attention to this one. I want you to listen to his settings, of course. But I want you to listen to what he says. After this interview, he essentially told me that he'd rather finish dead last than use this technology. And he wasn't the only one. A lot of the old school anglers were. And he said because his skill and knowledge was being thrown away. But I want you to listen to exactly what he says about what his knowledge and all the knowledge he has, what's been done to it by Livescope. So watch this, and then I want you to listen to my weekly vlog after his part. Now remember, this is one of Garmin's biggest guys. So listen to his sales pitch, listen to what I just told you, but also listen to what he says about his knowledge as a whole, and then listen at the end. Let's go.
Hey, Elite Series Pro Bernie Schultz. We're here at Lake Fork in East Texas, and it's been a forward-facing sonar event all the way. The guys are up there in the top, just dominating with that electronic technology. I struggled. I couldn't feed the fish. I could see them just as clear as can be. It's opened my eyes to how fish move now. I didn't, I'm old school, and I kind of always believed what I read in Bassmaster magazine that fish travel highways and creek channel bends and stopping points and all the staging areas. And then I found out, since using forward-facing sonar, it's more about random travel. It's like they're in every part of the water column, in every part of the lake, and it's just where you find the concentrations or those that are responding to whatever you're presenting. So for me, it's still a learning experience. I'm getting better at it. Smallmouth are pretty easy, but largemouth, I got a lot to learn yet. But it's incredible technology, and it will teach you a lot more about bass.
So what kind of settings, like, do you use default settings, or you have a kind of a baseline settings that you use?
My game's at about 70%. My range is about 80 feet, sometimes a little longer. It just depends on the depth of fishing. And I use the orange graphics.
Right.
I'm pretty basic,
Yeah, so the favorite color is like orange crawfish. You like that a lot?
Yeah, I like that color, and then I'll adjust my settings accordingly. But I'm not the best guy at it. I'm still learning. It's a learning process. I'm an old dog trying to learn a new trick, so that's where I'm at.
I do appreciate your time. Thank you. Welcome back to the channel. I haven't done a vlog in some time, so I'm sitting out here at work, pretty much through for the day, and I've been reading all the comments talking about Livescope this and how it's taking the skill out of that and so forth and so on. I was at the Lake Fork event this weekend. Met a lot of nice folks, met a lot of fans. Couldn't believe how many I had out there, which I'm very thankful for. Interviewed a lot of pro anglers, trying to get their settings and things like that, and heck, just talking to some of them. And one of the things that I hear so much, I wanted to address a few things, is you hear, it's going to affect the fish population. Well, Livescope's been out for, or some form of Panoptic's been out for 10 years. It's been pretty prevalent for the last 2 to 3. And as you can see by Lake Fork, it did not affect the size of the fish, the numbers of fish. It does not do it. Most bass fishermen that I know are catch and release fishermen. You're not going to stop the guys who don't Livescope or who like to keep a limit from keeping a limit. If it's legal, they're going to keep it. Some people said, the DNR needs to do their job and regulate this. You can't regulate advancement. You may regulate the technology of some sorts, but the DNR needs to do their job in terms of setting fish limits and things like that. If they see there's a problem in terms of being too many fish taken out, Livescope's not. I know people that's been keeping a limit of crappie regardless of whether they did it with Livescope or not. So there needs to be some proper limits set if they feel like the fish population is going down. Bass populations are not going down. People who keep bass have been keeping them before Livescope, and they always going to keep them. There's 8, or it's in Louisiana, there's 10 is the limit. And I know somebody who's a friend of mine that keeps 10 every time he goes. Every time he goes, he's going to keep his 10, regardless how big they are. You're not going to stop that mentality. You're not going to make somebody put it back regardless. They're going to keep their limits. So if you want to control limits, you're going to have to set the limits to the proper locations or the proper limits to sustain the fishery. As you can see, it's not hurting Lake Fork. It ain't hurting Toledo Bend. It didn't hurt Sandy Cooper. People all over the country are doing it. Now, the second thing I want to talk about is they say it takes the skill away from it. And that is probably the problem that's making the most anglers mad. It's taking the skill out of the sport. And that's kind of weird to me, because I see it and I go, okay, let's take away all the live scopers. And I looked at a bunch of them. I actually wrote down some of the stuff, and I'm going to cover this in a new podcast we got coming with the Spotted Dog podcast. If you didn't see our first one, you should check it out. I'm going to be on this one quite a bit. But I looked at all the anglers who were so-called old school anglers, the skilled anglers, and I don't want you to take that as disrespect. I think Rick Clunn's probably the greatest ever, or one of the top 5. Roland Martin, Kevin Van Dam, and all those guys. I looked at all those guys that are so-called skilled anglers, the bank beaters, that's a skilled angler. So when I think about what somebody calls skilled anglers, I don't truly think, for example, John Cox, they consider him he's a skilled angler. He was up in shallow water throwing a frog and a chatterbait or whatever he's throwing. Watched him 5 hours on Thursday, and I was like, it was dreadful. It was horrible. To be such a skilled angler, he made 0 adjustments. He stuck to it to a 13-pound limit, maybe at the most 12. Is that a skilled angler? Now, I'm not taking nothing away from him. He's very good. I'm just saying, that's the skilled angler people are arguing for. Rick Clunn, bottom of the barrel. Gerald Swindle, bottom of the list. Bernie Schultz, bottom of the list. Clifford Pace, bottom of the barrel. All these guys that, bottom of the barrel. They were bottom of the list, dead bottom in the standings. Does that make them not good fishermen? Absolutely not. But a good fisherman can look at something and make an adjustment. If I'm fishing shallow, I think Hackney, he did okay. I think he was like 30s, 25th, 30, somewhere in that area. He made some adjustments and went out. Just because you don't like something, you don't like to go offshore and fish for something, doesn't mean it's not skillful. McKinney was he was flipping under docks, he was out deep. I mean, he was doing a lot of different things. So it was there to be had. I'll give you another example. Hank Cherry heard it out of his own mouth. He did not make the day 4 cut, but he did make it all 3 days and did very well. He literally stayed in the area the size of about a football field, he said, and threw a chatterbait the entire tournament. And he watched fish and he just kept going round and round. That's old school fishing. That's it. So old school fishermen made an adjustment and did those things. So when I hear people talk about, he's just taking the skill out, it's just a different skill. It's just a different skill. Things change, things advance. Milliken made a heck of a post talking about it. Advancements, or every angler brings something new to the table. I mean, they called KVD Dr. Crankenstein for a reason, because he went out cranking, and he was the father. I mean, he started it. D. Thomas was the father of flipping. Nobody flipped until then. There's always something that drives you to the next level. And if you think just because you're scoping, you're going to be dominant. Robert Gee was amazing on Toledo Bend, and he was not dead last, next to last. He's a scoper. It didn't work out for him. So just because you're scoping doesn't automatically mean you can catch them. It just means you have to have a different skill set than the guy before. I get so tired of hearing that. It's not a skill. It's not a skill. It's not a skill. A skill is making an adjustment. Going down the bank with a spinnerbait or a chatterbait, that's not skillful. The fish were supposed to be on the banks. They were shallow, you could have got out there with a lipless crankbait and went down the bank in Texas with a red rattle trap, red lipless bait, and caught you 18 pounds a day, 20 pounds a day without ever looking at a piece of electronic. It's been happening for years. Could have done it. But the stubbornness of some of these anglers who, out of their mouth, self-admittedly to me, said, I'd rather finish dead last than use Livescope to prove a point. What point are you proving? That you got too much money? That fishing ain't as bad off as you put it out to be? That you making a lot more money off your sponsors than you put on? And that you're not as broke as you say you are? That was coming out of a lot of their mouths. What point are you proving? That you're going to get cut if you don't change really soon? You don't have to like something. I'll give you a good example. I cannot stand flipping a jig. Cannot stand it. Cannot stand it. And I'll get my brains beat out when it's flipping jigs on trees and things like that. I get my brains beat out. Can't stand it. Can't stand throwing a worm. Drives me insane. I cannot handle it. Does that mean if I get beat by it, I don't want to outlaw throwing a jig? Just either got to throw a jig or take my medicine. Stop using Livescope as an excuse for you not being able to win. Rick Clunn, the last time he won was on the St. Johns River. I think he won twice. Am I right? Both of them on St. Johns, throwing a spinnerbait in some dollar pads. Well, somebody's going to argue. Well, it takes skill to know they're there. Everybody knew they were there. It was the time of year for the spawn. It was the pre-spawn. Everybody knew they were there. Everybody did it. He did it a little bit better than everybody else, so he won the tournament. Scott Martin, one of the most skilled Livescope anglers out there, he did not do well at Toledo Bend or Lake Fork. He's very skilled with the Livescope. He didn't make excuses. He just didn't hit them on the head. It takes skill to find the fish. It takes skill to make them bite. It's just a different kind of skill. One other thing that we need to talk about, and this is very much so. I've heard this from Livescopers all over saying the same thing. Livescope has taught me that everything we knew about fishing was wrong. Wrong. So all that skill, that knowledge, self-admittedly from anglers saying that all the knowledge and everything they had learned before was wrong. So does the older anglers did they really have that much skill? Do they really have that much knowledge, as we're proving a lot of the knowledge is wrong? A lot of the things we thought were wrong, that a lot of the anglers in interviews with me would say, I'd ask them, they say, look, we thought they related to creek channel bends more than they do. We thought we thought they would stop on certain pieces, stop at this depth. We didn't realize that a lot of times they just roam out in open water looking for stuff to eat. They just start roaming and looking, and the old saying is 90% of the fish are in 10% of the water is what we're realizing is true. That fish don't always use creek channels like we used to think they did for highways. They don't just swim down the creek channel. They just randomly swim. If they want to go over there, they just randomly swim in a straight line sometimes. They want to go eat, they just go off the bank. They don't always pull up to feed on a ledge. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. We're finding that all the knowledge we thought was set in stone is not so set in stone anymore. So it's not as much to me that the anglers are less skilled. It's just a different skill. It's not taking away anything from the older anglers. Now, another thing I want to cover is that they're saying, well, we got to create us a legend tour. Why don't you just say you can't win? Why don't you, if I signed up for the legend tour, the first thing somebody have in mind, man, signing up, thank you for signing up, because we know you can't win. You just open the door up for somebody else who can beat me. These anglers they've got their backs against the wall. They've been I'll give you a great example, Bernie Schultz. And I got an interview coming with him on his Livescope settings. And you'll want to hear what I have to say at the beginning of the video. I promise you, he's been hanging on, just treading water, making a living in bass. And now all of a sudden these young guys are knocking at the door and they're finna replace him because he won't change. He self-admittedly said, I'm not doing it. He's going to be gone. Now, he's finna hit his age. He's finna retire. Swindle's made all his money. He's going to retire. So is Hackney. Clun, he's got the money. He probably don't have to fish. He just fishes because it's fun. But these guys they've been on easy street, and now all these young guys are hungry, and they want it, and they're coming. Ben Milliken, coming. He's there. Tyler McKinney, he's coming. These boys are young, and they're learning. And you know what? You don't have to like everything that you do. If you play baseball, you don't have to like the batting cage, but you better get in there and do it if you want to be good. You don't have to like bunting. If you want to win a game, sometimes you got to bunt. It's just a different skill. And if they open up a Legends Tour, first of all, who's going to sponsor it? Because all the money in these professional tours comes from electronics and motor companies and things like that. And yeah, you might be able to survive for a little while, but it's going to be small payouts, small this. Everything's going to go downhill. And I ain't saying that, I mean, money runs this sport. You tried to take a sport that was not made to be a mainstay way of living and turned it into a profession, and that's okay. That's a great thing. But you turned a sport that wasn't meant for that. People had regular jobs. They go home and guide, and you turned it into a sport where you fish 9 tournaments a year and you don't do crap the rest of the year, maybe guide a little bit on the side. And you can make a comfortable living if you're good and make money off your sponsors, and now you're griping and gonna bite the hand that you're feeding. We're right back to where we was 5 years ago. That's no joke. Everybody was griping about the money and this, that, and the other. Ain't nothing changed. Same thing. It's just the old hands are getting pushed out by the young guns. And I was at Lake Fork, and I'm here to tell you, the crowds were monstrous. The crowd favorite, Ben Milliken, when he got off the boat, the entire crowd was there to see him. He had the crowd rocking. People were pumped up. People didn't care that it was Livescope this, Livescope that. All they wanted to see was them giant bass walk across the stage. I promise you that they just love seeing giant bass. Texas has got it figured out. Maybe the other countries need to figure it out too, with limits and slot limits and things like that. And that's why they have such giant bass. That's why Livescope ain't bothering them lakes. It's not bothering Lake Fork, because you can catch all the 5-pounders you want. You can't take them out of the lake. You can catch 8-pounders, can't take them out of the lake 90% of the time. And that is my 2 cents on whether or not skill is being pushed out of the sport. Bring the